Hey, it's James Mulvaney here, and in today's video I'm going to answer the question, what questions should you ask someone if you've booked them for your show and you're not really sure what to ask them? Or maybe you've already structured a set of questions that are really based around the kind of normal things that you might ask that particular guest relating to what they want to talk about. But here are 10 questions that are guaranteed to get you good answers no matter what the person does or what industry they're in. So let's dive in. So if you're new to this channel, my name is James Mulvaney. I work with entrepreneurs and podcasters, helping them broadcast their ideas online and grow their audiences. So if you like content just like this, all about podcasting, interviewing people, that kind of thing, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notification bell if you want updates, because I'm always releasing videos just like this one every single Friday, in fact. And I'm also founder of radio.co, podcast.co, matchmaker.fm and Q, so go and check them out too. So in today's video, as I mentioned, we want to ask the questions that perhaps other people aren't asking, or maybe you want to get some interesting responses from guests and you're bored of just asking the normal sorts of questions, or you've already got a list of things prepared that are relating to kind of what their agenda is or what they want to do, and you want to throw in some stuff that's maybe going to get a little bit more of their personality across. Well, these set of 10 questions are perfect for that. So let's dive straight in with question number 1. So the first question is, who would you like to play in a movie? This is really cool because everyone watches films. I don't really know anyone who's never seen a film in their life. Some people are really obsessed with films, so they'll have straight away some great answers for this. But it's also kind of like one of these nice little icebreaker questions, I think. It's not too personal. They're not going to necessarily embarrass themselves by giving you an answer, but it's a good way to kind of break the ice and learn a little bit about that person. And some people will have an answer straight away, and some people will have to think about it for a little bit, but it's a great question to lead with. Who would you like to play in a movie? So once they've answered that question, if you're struggling for content and you want them to really go into detail, you could maybe ask them why they picked that person, or what is it they like about that particular film, or what do they think the characteristics between themselves and that movie character are kind of similar, or is it perhaps that they want to kind of escape and play some kind of fantasy role? So there's all sorts of different angles that you can go down after you ask this question if you want to really kind of probe them and get some interesting answers. But like with a lot of these questions, you can ask them at a sort of top level, or you can really drill into detail. It's completely up to you. So question number 2 is, what is the most memorable moment in your career so far? This is a really interesting one because you'll learn a lot about your guest and what's important to them. And also, you might be able to relate to them. You might have a similar thing that's happened in your career that you can then discuss in turn. I think this is a really useful question, and it's kind of one of these questions that most people will have an answer to. Not necessarily everyone, but most people, especially if they've been working for a number of years or they've been running a business for a number of years, they'll have a solid moment, that kind of aha moment, or they'll have something that they're really, really proud of, they remember doing, or they met someone that was really interesting at a conference or something like that. But it's a really, really good discussion point. So let's move on to number 3. So question number 3 is, what did your parents do for a living? Now, I think this is really interesting because, again, it can be really revealing about a person. Their kind of motivation quite often will come from their parents. And particularly maybe if you're interviewing someone in business, for example, you'll often find that someone's an entrepreneur. Their parents might have had the entrepreneurial streak, and they kind of got that or inherited that from their parents. Or they might have completely the opposite, been self-made and come from sort of very humble beginnings and built themselves up to something. So I think it's always really, really interesting to see about someone's background, find out where they've come from and how they've got where they are today, and also if that had any impact on him. It's not necessarily a question I think you want to ask everyone, but certainly for people who are perhaps running businesses or they're leaders in their industry, I think this is a really solid question to ask your guests. So on to question number 4, and this is a really, really interesting one, because you know what the podcasting world is like, and you know what it's like when you quite often have guests in. They're there because they're trying to promote their products, their services, or they're trying to kind of in some way, shape or form, without sort of sounding negative, blow their own trumpet. I mean, we all do it, right? We all go on podcasts because we want to talk about ourselves, we want to talk about how great we are, or we want to talk about the amazing things that we're doing or our colleagues are doing, etc. This one kind of turns that all on its head. So rather than asking them about how amazing they are, it's actually saying, well, tell us what you're not very good at. And again, I think this is a really, really great way of really getting people to open up and talk about actually what they're not good at, because not everyone could be good at everything, right? And there's certainly things that I can say, well, I'm really not great at that. But generally speaking, when you go onto a podcast, you kind of want to talk about what you are good at, or what your merits are, or how amazing your product or your service is. So kind of flipping it around and turning it on its head can kind of sometimes, number one, be a bit unexpected for the guest, which is great because you can kind of catch them off guard. And sometimes when you catch people off guard, it means they're going to be more honest because they won't necessarily rehearse an answer. But also it just kind of gives you more of an insight into that person's life. And again, that's really, really good from an interview standpoint of building rapport with that person and helping that interview unfold moving forward. Number 5 is, what is one thing that people are generally quite surprised to find out about you? Again, this is kind of an open-ended question. It could be anything. It could be something relating to their personal life. It could be something relating to their hobbies or their passions or their interests. It can be something relating to their past or their family. It could be absolutely anything. Really, really open-ended question, and gives the guest the opportunity, again, to give your audience more of a feel for who they are and what they like to do, or what they don't like to do, or whatever, really. I think this is just such an open-ended question, and it can be interpreted in so many different ways. So number 6, what do you look forward to in future, either personally or professionally? And this can really be anything. Again, it's one of these open-ended questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be something about their career or their business. It could be that they're getting married next year, or it could be that they're going to be visiting a country that they've never visited before, or something like that. And I think, again, it's really, really interesting to find out what people have got coming up in their lives and what they're looking forward to. Everyone's going to have a different answer for this question. So number 7 is, what do you think the world will look like in 10 years? Kind of like the previous question, what are you looking forward to? It's kind of asking them to paint this sort of futuristic picture or utopian view of what the world will look like. Now, I think there's 2 different types of people. There's people who really love sci-fi, and I've got plenty of friends who fall into this category. They'll have this really kind of futuristic view of how it's going to be completely different, the spaceships flying around, all this kind of stuff. And then there's people like me who don't really like sci-fi that much, and they'll probably just turn around and say, well, it's probably going to be pretty similar to what it is now, but it might have a few differences, like more AI, for example. Like if you were to ask me this question right now, I'd say, well, we might have like more self-driving cars and that kind of thing. But realistically, is the world going to look completely different in 10 years? Probably not. But anyway, it's a good, interesting question to ask, and you can have a lot of fun with it. Number 8 is, what do you want to be remembered for, or what mark do you want to try and make on the world? I think it's really interesting to see how people will see themselves making a difference in the world, and we all want to make a difference in various different ways. I think it's a really, really interesting question. Like if you were talking to, say, your grandkids or their grandkids, like how would they remember you, or how would they have this picture of, the great things that you did? So again, it's kind of one of these questions that's kind of pretty open-ended. People take it and interpret it in a different way. Maybe you have to be a little bit careful about how you ask this one, because you don't want it to be sort of appear like some kind of weird veiled threat. However, I think, again, it's a really interesting question to ask people. So let me know in the comments below, how do you want to make a difference in the world? I want to know your thoughts. Number 9 is, how can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing? This is really just kind of an obvious question. Some people sometimes forget it at the end, but just remember the guest is there to share their experiences and then impart their knowledge. But also, they really want an opportunity to promote themselves or promote what they're doing. So it's just giving your guest that kind of polite opportunity at the end of the interview to pitch their services. And if they haven't done so throughout the interview, it's always a good question to have in at the end, just in case. It's beneficial for everyone. It's beneficial for the listeners, beneficial for you, and also for the guest. And finally, number 10. This is a great one to finish up on, if you want to end things on a little bit of a funny, light-hearted note. And it's a bit of an interesting one as well, is kind of flipping the tables around and saying, well, if you were in my shoes and I was asking you questions, what would you have asked yourself that I didn't ask you? Or basically saying, what questions did I miss out of the interview, or is there anything else you want to add? Again, it's a good way to kind of prompt the guest to kind of perhaps talk about something that they would have liked to have talked about, maybe they didn't get the chance to, but also challenges the guest as well and allows them to think outside the box a bit. So there we go, 10 questions that you can ask podcast guests, any podcast guest, or if you're doing a radio interview or an interview on video or a live stream, doesn't really matter. 10 interview questions to ask people that will get really interesting answers and hopefully produce great content for your show. And these are kind of good fallbacks to have. These are good bank of questions that I like to have. You know, if I'm doing an interview, it's like a fail-safe. You can always fall back on them if you're running out of time, or if they've kind of whittled through the questions you've got prepared really quickly, or here's how you can bulk out your interviews and get some really interesting insights into the world of your guest. Thanks very much for watching. Before you go, I'd appreciate a comment below if you've got some questions that you have as like your go-to interview questions that maybe I haven't included in this video. Let me know in the comments. If you found this useful, I'd also appreciate a big thumbs up. Thanks very much for watching. Subscribe for more content like this, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye. Hey, wait, before you go, perhaps you're looking to start a podcast for your business. And did you know that most businesses make the same exact mistakes? Whenever we work with clients who are struggling to get their podcast off the ground, or they're not getting the traction that they deserve, it turns out that most of the time they're making the same mistakes. So what I've done is I've compiled a guide which is called the 5-Step Business Podcast Checklist, which will show you exactly what you need to know to get your podcast up and running without making the same mistakes that most other people do. So you can download it for free at jamesm.com/podcast. That's jamesm.com/podcast. Go and grab your copy today.